So what we're testing here, let's look at the design. We are testing these two components, not this, right? So we are testing that the home controller, the home view controller, will call the repo client, and whatever the repo client returns, the home view controller will show on the screen correctly. And then we have this component in isolation tested, and we say, okay, this component works as expected. Then you can test your remote repository client. And here it depends on URL session, right? Which is a framework that will talk to the web. URL session, and you also have a dependency on a backend service. Now this is flaky because what if the backend is not working when you run the tests? Well, what if your connection is not working? There are many reasons why this connection would fail. So what you can do here is also, you can test this component without making a real request to the backend, because you have a contract with the backend. The backend says, we will return JSON, and this is the fields that will be in the JSON. This is the name of the fields. This is the expected values those are the optional fields. Those are the mandatory fields. And you have a contract. Out of that contract, we can create JSON files in the test suite and test that the remote client, if the URL session returns that specific JSON, it will map into reasonable models. So we tested this in isolation, saying that whatever the client returns, we will render it on the screen. And then you test that whatever the backend returns, we will convert into models. And you, in isolation, you test this in isolation and this in isolation. And if they both do what they're expected to do, then in integration, they should also work, as long as they respect their contracts.
Yeah.
So you can test things in isolation. We start separating concerns instead of testing everything in integration, which is slower.
Yeah.
It's harder to find issues.
Flaky.
Now, if there's a problem here, we know exactly. So let's say these tests start failing. We know exactly the setup that makes it fail. Okay, so we have a problem when the repo client fails. The test tells exactly what the problem is. But when you have a lot of systems integration and you run an integration test, like a UI test, and it fails, you don't know where the problem is. The problem could be in the backend, the problem could be in the URL session, the problem could be in the UI, the problem could be in the view model, it could be in the remote client. You don't know, you need to debug.
Yeah.
And that's slow.
Here we are very specific.